What paranormal experience convinced you that ghosts are real? Episode 2. My parents have a china cabinet that has lighting fixtures inside, so, if you wanted, the dishware inside could be illuminated. Despite never being used, the cord always remains plugged into an electric socket. Growing up, I was always told stories about how after the death of one of my grandmothers, the lights would turn on every so often, and roses could be smelt in the room the cabinet was in, one of my grandmother's favorite scents, I believe. I was too young to remember any of this. Last year, I was walking through my town's cemetery. I walked this route quite regularly, to avoid a busy road. I was in the oldest section of the cemetery, where people had been buried 200 or 300 years ago. For a while, I walked slowly, figuring out how old each person was when they died and reading the last names to see if I recognized any. After returning home, that evening, the china cabinet lights were on. By that point in time, no one knew I had walked through the cemetery, nor was there a power outage, earthquake, or some other occurrence that could possibly explain the lights being on. The lights hadn't been turned on in years, and this was now the second house and third electric socket the cabinet had been plugged into. I think the time I spent at the graves that day might have caused something to follow me home. I stopped going through the cemetery as much and, if I did, avoided doing what I did that day. It hasn't happened since. In the following weeks, my mom and I smelt roses, despite not having any in the house, nor anyone using a rose-scented fragrance. Every month on the 5th since I moved in this house, someone is always screaming "let me in" a distorted voice outside my door. I've lived here for 5 years and know these little patterns. It manifests every 5th of the month. When it appears, you can smell it before you hear it, since it smells like smoke and garlic. So, at first, I thought the stove was on, and it was burning, but then my sleepy ass was getting ready to stop the fire. So, I suited up and brought my deer killer, just in case, and when I was about to open the door, I hear the banging and screaming of an adult man saying, "Let me in." And that's when my Hispanic senses kicked in. I found my compact ladder and hopped out the window. This persisted for a while, and it always stayed in the range of 11-12 p.m. to 4 a.m. I thought a psycho was in my house, and I had it searched from head to toe, multiple times by the police. Me and my boys and the police found nothing. So I installed a security system, and once again, when I reviewed the footage, 11:12 to 4 o'clock had been non-existent, like it skipped to the second it stopped. So, I just built a routine, because I paid $300,000 for this easily $700,000 house. I am not about to be run out by some smelly-ass Allstate speaker sounding creep, scare me out of my house, and I know if it ain't a ghost, then it ain't human, cause this shit will sound like it's crawling on the ceiling. It's like the dry tapping of drywall and the soft popping of bones. But it doesn't eat any of my food, doesn't steal any of my things, and as long as I keep my door closed during the hours of exposure. On the 5th of every month, I'm safe, and I have a nice house for 40% of its original price. So I plan to outlive that creep no matter what. But if a priest or ghost hunter can fix this, I'll definitely give my local one a call. Also, my house on the 5th deactivates all electronics connected and wireless, during the time until I'm outside of 50 feet range, and the times I've asked if there was a power outage in my neighborhood, my house was the only one blacked out on the street, like some freaky imp. When I was in college and studying at home, I remember needing to find a particular old 17th century play called The Alchemist by Ben Jonson. Me being poor and stupid, I didn't buy the class textbook, so I had to find it on my own. I was at my desk and behind me was a walk-in closet, which I used as a library, as I collected old and rare books. I remember thinking that I saw the play in an old anthology of literature that I owned, and quickly pushed that out of my mind as I thought it would take too much effort for a text that was surely available on Project Gutenberg online. I heard a loud thump behind me. I turned around in my chair and walked into the closet, and on the floor was a book turned open with the pages facing up. You have to understand for this to truly sink in, that my closet was lined with shelves that extended far enough back that no part of my books were hanging over the edge. I was meticulous and careful with them as some were relics. I looked at the book in disbelief, and when I saw that it was the anthology of literature I was thinking of, and not only that, but the header of the page showed it was a page of the play The Alchemist, I knew this was something truly out of the ordinary and unexplainable. I have more experiences in this house, but this one will remain, for me, as irrefutable proof that something intelligent, that understood my inner thoughts, caused that to happen. In the same house, on the day my father died, my grandma also tells a story of how pictures in the house were flying off the walls at her. My dad hated her guts, and she's always been an honest person. I don't know if I'd call what happened to me an experience with a ghost necessarily, but I thought it was worth mentioning. Someone asked, See if it happens again with a book. You need an update. If it works, you might just have a butler ghost. Unfortunately, I don't have many of the books anymore, not even sure if I have the one I was talking about, and the family no longer owns the house. Sometimes I go back to visit the island and see the places where I've had paranormal experiences in the past. If you'd like to hear more, we lived on a different property on the island, which had several acres of wooded land surrounding it. When I was about 8, my dad was clearing a path through the woods as it was so dense and overgrown with underbrush that it was basically untraversable. We made it to a little opening in the woods where the overcanopy killed off most of the underbrush, and it was filled with fox dens and spider webs. There was a large old tree in the clearing, which had over years and years began to devour a tiny little rocking chair with its roots. My dad took a picture of the rocking chair as there was something oddly surreal about it. As we were coming back at the edge of the forest line, one of us tripped over a piece of plastic sticking out of the ground. Clearing up some of the bush around it, we found a shallow indentation in the earth about 6 long by 3 to 4 wide. My dad came back with his backhoe and began digging it out to see what it was, and there was a lot of white substance mixed in with the dirt that he assumed was lime. He called the police to report it before digging further, and a coroner came out to investigate. This was a tiny island with about 2,000 permanent residents, and the coroner said that this looked like an unmarked grave. He said to bury it, mark it, and forget about it, as there were no known cases of missing persons, and this wasn't worth an immediate investigation. To this day, thinking about that haunts me slightly, as who knows if he was just protecting the good old boys club. Now that all this exposition is out of the way, we ended up going into the house at about nighttime and plugged in my dad's digital camera into the television. He was cycling through some images he took of the woods, when suddenly the chair showed up on the TV. At that moment, the power flashed out, leaving nothing but an impression of the tree and the chair in my mind while we all sat in pitch black darkness. The next day, after the power company restored power, they talked with my dad as they said they found a section of the line nearby our property had been dug up and severed in a straight cut. We had no idea who or what would have done that, but it was what it was. My dad decided he wanted to find that picture in the camera again, and he flicked through all the pictures, passing multiple times, going back and forth where the chair should have been, but it wasn't there. We didn't go back out into those woods for a long time, and I don't remember anyone ever going back to look for that chair. What I do remember is going back to the island after more than a decade because I wanted to see it again. I went out to the property, now owned by someone else, and the woods seemed as if they never changed. They were empty, quiet, devoid of any life, but there were plenty of skeletons of small animals and deer around the places. It seemed almost like someone had strychnine poisoned the woods. I found the tree in the clearing, but the chair was gone. As if it never existed. I don't know what happened, but that place is a fucking nightmare. My friend has insisted that his parents' house was haunted for years while we were growing up. His sister told stories about a ghost that would turn her TV on at nighttime, or do something like shake her bed while she was in it, but I never really believed them. One day, they asked me if I would house sit while they were all on vacation. It's where my drum kit lived at the time, so I was always there anyway. We were in a band, so I didn't think anything of it and said yes, and that was when my first and only paranormal experience happened. I'll never forget it. I had slept in on a sunny day, it was about 11 in the morning, and I had nowhere to go. I was laying awake in a bed in their spare bedroom upstairs, knowing full well that I was alone in the house, when all of a sudden, the sound of an adult man singing opera filled the entire house for about 30 seconds. It was extremely loud and completely unignorable. I will never forget how scared I was, and after the singing stopped, my heart was absolutely beating out of my chest. I got dressed and sprinted out of the house as fast as I could, and didn't go back to finish my house sitting duties after that. I figured the ghost had it handled. I talked to an old woman in a rocking chair when I was 6 years old. Rocker was rocking and everything. My uncle came in and couldn't see anyone. That and I had a ghost or demon shove me right down the stairs when I was like 8 or 9, and no one else was home. One night, I fell asleep on the living room couch when I woke up and opened my eyes for a second to see someone else looking at me very closely to my face. I immediately flipped back over, covering my face for a second before flipping the cover off and seeing nothing happened, all within moments. The face was hairless with gray, pale skin and neck with all black eyes and black badges underneath them. Happened 9 years ago in high school, and honestly, I haven't stopped thinking about it randomly to this day. I was convinced before this, but this made me undoubtedly believe. I was staying over at my friend's, and we were asleep in the living room. Suddenly we both wake up, sit up, and look at the clock completely in sync. It was exactly 5 a.m. Then, his dog starts barking down the dark hallway at the stairs. We looked over at each other in shock and ducked under the blankets, lol. Or, maybe the time, in the same house, where it was early in the morning, and we heard walking upstairs. All the way to the stairs, down the stairs, and the bathroom door slammed extremely hard. No one was upstairs, no windows, AC or anything that could have slammed the door with that force. I hated that house with a passion. The upstairs and the bathroom were very unsettling. I have a handful of other stories from that place. It's the sole reason, I believe. My partner and I were sitting in bed. The room is dim but not pitch. There's a mirror hanging on the closet door to our right. Like, if I turn my head, I'll see myself. We were watching TV when I saw something huge and black glide by in the mirror. Kinda like No Face from Spirited Away but without the adorable mask. I thought to myself, as paranormal things aren't uncommon for me, okay. Just gonna let that one go. Did I even really see that? Am I hallucinating? I didn't say anything out loud, but my partner says, did you just see something weird go by in the mirror? They described what they saw, and it matched what I saw, and we took the mirror out of the room, lol. My husband and I moved into a new house last year. COVID did us real dirty, and various less than ideal scenarios meant our savings took a huge hit. So we made the decision to move outside of the city. Cheaper rent, bigger space, a garden for the first time, all the good stuff. Since we moved in, there has always been a weird feeling, and I believe that, looking back, I have experienced a few odd things already, that I have overlooked and tried to rationalize away. The only one that I can't deny though, happened earlier this week. I am still working from home, while my husband is back in the office, so I am at home most of the day on my own. I have gotten used to this new routine over time, and honestly, I'm pretty happy with working at home in the peace and quiet. It allows me to get other things done around the house during my breaks, and cutting out that commute has been a godsend, especially now that we are outside of the city. Anyway, because of this new routine, I've gotten used to having a new sixth sense around timings of the day and when I can expect my husband home, usually around 7:30 p.m. The night this happened, I clocked off work early and decided to take a shower since it was hair wash day. Thick hair friends know how much prep this takes. My husband often comes home when I am showering and usually announces himself so as not to scare me. For a bit of context, our house is a super old English terraced house, which means it's long, thin and tall. When we moved in, the landlord had just renovated the bathroom, which is located right at the top of the stairs, by adding a new freestanding shower suite. Basically, if you are standing in the shower with the door open, you can look right down the stairs and down the hallway with a clear view of the front door. When home alone, I often shower with the door open to mitigate the scare I will inevitably get when my husband comes home and bumbles up the stairs. When my husband gets home, he always announces himself as he comes through the front door, usually something along the lines of "I'm home" or "It's just me." From the bathroom, the angle of the stairs means that I can only see up to the knees of whoever is standing directly at the front door. My husband knows this and always bends down ever so slightly to wave his hand up the stairs, if he hears the shower. So, while I am standing in the shower listening to the rattle of keys in the front door, I became consciously aware that it was much too early for my husband to be home yet, since I had clocked off of work early and it was still only about 4:30 p.m. While I am freaking out and staring wide-eyed down the stairs, my husband comes through the door. I see his feet with his familiar gray suit and dress shoes. He announces himself in his distinctive deep voice, "It's just me," and bends down to wave. I see his hand angled up at me and a quick flash of the top of his blonde head. Relief. He must be home early today. Only, he wasn't home early. After I relaxed, I looked away to finish shampooing, and about a minute later was when I noticed that I had never heard the front door close. I never heard the sound of his heavy feet on the wooden floor or the loud thud of him dropping his work backpack to the floor before going into the kitchen. I peeked back down the stairs, and everything was as I left it before showering, no bag, no work shoes strewn in the porchway. Everything was normal. Except that my husband hadn't come home as I had seen him do. Naturally, I freaked. Even though I checked the door and it was locked internally, I still went through the whole house with a kitchen knife just in case. Nothing was out of place. I sat on the sofa in silence for about 2 hours before my husband finally arrived home and went through his nightly routine, the very routine that I had already seen him do once that evening. I never told him about this, and the other goings-on that I have remembered with the gift of hindsight. I know he wouldn't believe me. He's as skeptical as they come, and I don't want him to freak out thinking that I'm suddenly seeing things. My parents' second house had some oddities in the first year or so, after we had moved into it. All but one event happened to my mother. I don't recall all of the stories, as most of them were either pretty minor or can be reasonably debunked, but here are the important ones. 1. I think this one was the first to happen, and the only one that my dad also witnessed. That is, if you count hearing something as witnessing it. We had a shop vac perched atop a freestanding shelf in the laundry room. Now the laundry room was directly next to my parents' bedroom in such a way that the washer and dryer were directly on the other side of the wall from their bed. Exactly how we had the washer, dryer, and shelves arranged, I don't know, because shortly after this, we took apart the shelves and stored them elsewhere for unrelated reasons. However, the shop vac was atop it, and the washing machine was somewhere nearby. My mother usually keeps the lid to the washing machine open at night to let it air out. My parents heard this crash one night as they were falling asleep. It sounded like it was in the laundry room, so they went to check it out. The shop vac had somehow managed to land in the washing machine. Now, it was positioned on the shelf in such a way that there were no reasonable means for it to fall off of the shelf, as everything was pretty stable, and there was no angle or anything that could cause it to slide. I know because they tested it and tried to place it on the shelf in such a way that it could become unstable, but it didn't happen. This was the only poltergeist activity to occur. 2. My mother often sleeps on the living room couch. The living room of that house is situated in such a way that my bedroom and the spare room are off of one wall, and the doorway to the rest of the house, including the bathroom, is on the other. One night, my mother heard me walking across the living room, presumably to go to the bathroom, except that I wasn't walking across the room, but it sounded like I was going in circles around the rocking chair that was near the entrance to the hallway. My mother called my name, asking what I was doing. She got no answer. She kept calling name, becoming increasingly frustrated with me because I didn't say anything. Eventually, she turned on the light. Nothing was there. She checked on me. I was asleep. 3. On another occasion, my mother felt footsteps behind the couch. The couch wasn't up against the wall, and there was a walkable-sized area between the back of the couch and the front window. The thing is, she didn't hear the footsteps, only felt the weight of someone pacing back and forth. She said, "Can you stop it? I'm trying to sleep," and the footsteps stopped. 4. This one is not directly connected to the house itself, but is still creepy nonetheless. It also didn't technically happen to anyone in the house. My grandma called one day. She said, "Did you just call me a minute ago?" My mom hadn't. Grandma then continued to explain how she had just gotten a call from us, and when she answered, nobody was on the other end of the line. However, she could hear everything that was happening in the house. My dad was watching TV, my mother was vacuuming the rug, and both of my parents were arguing over something at the same time. She could also hear me playing whatever computer game I was into at the time, probably either Warcraft 3 or SimCity 4. On top of all this, she said that she heard a sound like paper being folded right next to the phone. Now, I've delved pretty deep into the creepy, spooky Askreddit collection on r/copypasta, and I've seen other stories of odd phone calls that involve a fabric folding noise happening in the foreground. The strangest part of all this is that it just happened to occur on the exact same day that my mom's aunt had died. 5. This one is my story, and it only took place within the last few years of my family living there, instead of the first. I had woken up before, though I cannot say how many times, by the voice of a little girl saying hello. I usually thought nothing of it, attributing it to the random nonsense generated by my brain while asleep. The thing is, on the few occasions that it occurred, the voice was the same, none of it was relevant to the dream, and it always woke me up. The one night, it giggled a sort of hey hey. 2 abrupt notes, the second being of slightly higher pitch than the first. The kicker is, I wasn't really asleep for that one. I was trying to restlessly fall asleep, but had not gotten into it yet. It's on my bucket list now to see a ghost, but as of yet, I've only ever heard one. 6. This last story is probably the least supernatural of all of them, but my mother nonetheless insists that it is. It was the last week that we would be living in the house, and my mother was cleaning the baseboards in the kitchen as she always had many times before. By baseboards, I mean these metal heating vents that rely on propane. While my mom was cleaning, she came across a piece of paper. She figured that it must have been something that recently fell back there, as it happened on occasion, since the place where we kept business cards and such was right next to this spot. She pulls it out, and it's a picture of the previous owners of the house with some other relative of theirs, I think it was their cousin or someone. My mom found this odd, considering how she had cleaned back there for 9 years at this point, and only ever found this picture within the last week of living there. She gave it to the previous owners, who were at the time living next door. They, of course, gave her the context of the photo, and that there was nothing unusual about it. It was just a picture of them next to some relative or other. Before you ask, no, the photo had not been taken after we moved in. That perhaps would have convinced me, but the fact that there was nothing spooky about the photograph itself leaves me skeptical about it. Still, my mother thought it was the spirit's way of saying goodbye. With the exception of the last 2 stories, the weird stuff was only after semi-recently moving into the house. After we moved out, my mom wondered if the new owners ever ran into the walking around ghost, or the little girl, whom I had named Charlotte. Here's a bonus story that hadn't been included the previous times that I posted this, in part because I didn't have all of the details correct until I asked my mother about this story again fairly recently. 7. Or, rather, 0, as this occurred before all of the aforementioned stories. My mother used to work part-time as a substitute lunch monitor at a school that was near where we used to live before moving into the house mentioned above. She used to commute to the school by walking nearly the entire length of a massive cemetery. Technically, it was more than one right next to each other. She would travel from its northeast corner to the school near its southwest one. I'll even link the location here, since I no longer live in the area. If you zoom out, look around, etc., you can see just how big it is. Heck, the throughway cuts through it. Anyway, the story is that during one of her commutes, she found the entire ground to be black with crows. They were everywhere, as far as you could see. My mom didn't think much of this, as they mostly just hopped out of her way as she walked down the road shown above. What she didn't think about until later was the fact that not a single one of them was making a sound. 8. On a different day, and I had originally thought the above story to have happened at the same time as this one, but my mother corrected me. She was walking through the same cemetery in early spring when she noticed a young girl in the distance, wearing a dress. She found it upsetting that someone would leave their young child unattended in a cemetery in clothing that would leave her a bit cold. At least give her a jacket or something. We later found out from someone who knows the story better, that the girl's name is Annabelle, and that she is commonly seen around crows. In fact, if anyone else is familiar with this particular spirit, I'd like to know more, but I have been unable to find anything other than the fact that she likes to ride in the backseats of people's cars.